Hello, everyone. Welcome to this, the first live stream of this run of Caring for Vulnerable Children. This is us coming towards the end of week two, and this is our first live stream where it'll give me the chance to respond to some of the comments and questions that have been posed over the first 2 weeks of the programme. So thanks very much for joining us. If you're joining us live in real time and watching this as it's happening, but also welcome to people that are watching it belatedly. I know there tends to probably be more people who can't engage in real time and will watch the recording on YouTube afterwards. So whether you're here in the moment or watching it afterwards, welcome and thank you for joining us. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Graham McPhee. I'm the lead educator on the Care for Vulnerable Children course. I'm based at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, in Scotland. I'm guessing most of you know that already because if you're watching this and you're 2 weeks into the programme, then you'll be familiar with who I am. So I'm just getting a message saying that the sound is possibly a bit low, so I'm not sure. I'm just going to reach over and maybe try and move this a bit closer. Hopefully that won't impact on the picture, and that might increase the volume a bit. Hopefully that works okay. I guess probably I should explain as well. It won't come as a surprise, I guess, for a lot of you to hear this. Normally, when we run programmes such as this, I would be doing these live stream events from the studio in the university. So my backdrop would be a bit different, and I would have some IT support and different equipment. With the worldwide global pandemic and the different kind of conditions that have been brought in, I'm doing these from home just now, so apologies for the slight technical bit there in relation to the volume in terms of how that's coming through. So let's start by saying kind of welcome and thanks for joining us. We're 2 weeks into this run of the programme. We've got over 1,700 people registered for this run, so that's fantastic that we've got such a large number of people and a really kind of truly international group of learners joined this time. We'll get at this point in time we've got 101 different countries represented, which is absolutely fantastic. Big majority from the UK, but we've got sizable proportions from Australia, India, the United States, Nigeria, Canada, and then there's a whole list of other countries from Vietnam, Russia, Bangladesh, Chile, Syria, Kuwait. I mean, I could list 101 countries, but welcome to you all. It's great to have such an international group of learners together here this time round. I mean, we're actually now with this run, we've had over 88,000 people register on the programme via the various runs of it. So it's absolutely fabulous, and it's always as international as this run in terms of we're regularly got 100 plus different countries represented in the learners. So that's fantastic that there's so much swapping of ideas and informations in the chat and in the comment. I guess one thing I want to mention up front as well. Now we said this at the beginning of the programme, but it's worth kind of reinforcing it in the first live stream event, and that's that the course was written and created before events of kind of February, March, and COVID-19, and the way the world had been impacted by that and had to respond. So there's nothing specific in our learning materials about COVID-19, although of course in a lot of the comments and discussions that I see on the course page, there's elements of that coming in completely naturally because of the situation that we're in and challenges that people are facing in terms of care for vulnerable children in various stages of kind of lockdown and restrictions in different countries. So we don't have any specific learning materials about COVID-19 in relation to this programme, but what I would urge people is if you're looking for more information about that, then to go to the Celsius webpage, and on the Celsius webpage we have a COVID-19 resource page which has been updated all the time, and there's lots of really relevant and interesting information, particularly for social workers, childcare workers, care workers more generally, teachers, etc. I guess understandably, a lot of that material is quite kind of Scottish or UK specific because we are based here in Scotland, in the UK. But I think a lot of the challenges and issues that we're facing in relation to this translate around the world. So that there would be lots of information for you there that might be interesting. So I would very much point you towards that, the Celsius COVID-19 resource page, and look for information from there. So what I'm proposing to do for the next half hour, I've got kind of two or three things that I'd kind of like to kind of run through. One is kind of talking a little bit about the poll that we set up in week one when we introduced the course, and we've got the responses from that. We've posted them on the page. I'd like to chat about that for a little bit, just kind of some of the issues and just kind of some of the things we spot from your responses there and some of the comments made. Secondly, I'm going to talk a little bit about Billy's story. We're now 2 weeks into Billy's story, and we see different comments getting posted after the first week and different comments getting posted again after the second week. So we're going to have a bit of a chat about that, and again, just kind of some of the themes and issues that are coming up here, and also kind of some people posted and presented questions in advance of this live session. I'm going to kind of make a point of responding to them and just picking up on some other general themes coming up from the comments that have been posted. So that's how we're going to spend the next kind of half hour or so. But I'm going to start with the poll. So caring for vulnerable children, and so in week one we kind of beginning to think about the general concepts of kind of risk and risk management and attitudes to risk, and kind of how we kind of try and assess that, and thinking about that in the context of children. And we had an exercise which in many ways is a very kind of academic exercise, and that we gave you 10 very, very short scenarios and said, right, here's 10 scenarios, pick the 3 that you think that there's the biggest risk, the most vulnerability, pick the 3 then and say why. Now, we opened that for a week. We've closed the poll now. If you go back onto that page in week one, if you haven't been there already, you will see the results in terms of the 10 scenarios and what percentage of people voted for them. And also I've put some comments there in terms of just kind of some of the bits coming out of that. But I'm going to kind of speak about this just for kind of a couple of minutes. I'm not going to run through all the results in terms of kind of every scenario, but I'm going to kind of probably pick out the ones that got selected the most, and kind of think about, right, kind of what do we think is the case here. And so scenario one, in terms of kind of number from 1 to 10, the way they were listed on the page, scenario number 1 is the one that most people selected. So a tiny baby who's been given a violent shaking by their carer, who's learning difficulties and is upset because the baby won't stop crying. 79% of you, so just about bang on, 4 out of every 5 people had that in the top 3. And it's not surprising at all. I think actually every run we've did Caring for Vulnerable Children where we've used this exercise, that's always been the scenario that most people have picked. And you know, when we look at the comments as to kind of why this has been selected consistently, we've got a number of factors. A tiny baby, so a child who's absolutely dependent on their carer, can't survive without them. But a carer who has learning difficulties and then upset because the baby won't stop crying. And whilst we don't have any details about the degree of learning difficulties and how that might impact on the carer, from some of the commentaries as well, right, there's concerns here about does the carer have able to understand what the crying is about, in terms of how they're interpreting that, how they're making sense about how they're responding to it, and then is responding with violent shaking, and obviously for a tiny baby, violent shaking being a huge risk factor. So in many ways, actually, when we think of this scenario in this way, the fact that there's 21% of people haven't picked it is perhaps surprising. So it's not surprising it's there at the top of the list in terms of most people that have selected it. The scenario after that got the most, was selected most, was a 6-month-old baby boy who's not had any attention or anything to eat for 10 hours. 61% of you selected that. And this is, I guess this is a bit more interesting in terms of kind of how we might interpret that. So again, we've got a 6-month-old baby boy. So I think there's something in common with the first scenario, which is kind of high notions of risk and vulnerability. The younger the child is, the absolute their absolute dependence on their care, and they can't care for themselves. And the only way they're going to be kept safe and kept free from risk and vulnerability, and the only way they're going to be able to help to grow and develop in a healthy and positive manner if their carers are doing things for them. So we've got this 6-month-old baby bit who has not had any attention or anything to eat for 10 hours. Now, occasionally we'll see comments there saying, well, no, 6 months, well, if you're lucky, I guess, 6-month-old babies can go through very long stretches of sleep, for instance. So, so, so that might not always, that just this scenario in terms of what's presented here might not always be a pointer of there's something to worry about here. But I think for somebody who's not had any attention, Effie, and it's raising concerns about what's the level of care that exists around about this child, this baby who is completely vulnerable in the care of adults. So we've got that common theme between the two scenarios who that have got the most votes, kind of very young children, 4-month-old, 6-month-old. And the scenario that got the third most votes, again, is one of the younger children in the scenario. And it was a scenario that says a 4-year-old girl who's a mother who's suffering from depression who has not fed her for 24 hours. I got 53% you select that. So just over half of you selected that in your top three, the more risky. And yet, 4-year-old older, so a bit more agency, a bit more development, but still very dependent on adults for care and protection, a whole range of things. And then again, we how much to read into things. A mother who is suffering from depression. Well, lots of people can suffer from depression and be impacted on it or by it in a whole range of different ways. So does it always have the potential consequence of it being a problem for the child that they're looking after? Absolutely not always. Many adults or carers who are experiencing depression will, parallel to that, be absolutely fantastic, safe, positive parents, carers, role models, etc. They may find it more of a challenge at times in terms of kind of how they work through their own issues, but it absolutely doesn't mean that that's going to be problematic, kind of guaranteed. But it's interesting that 50% have said that we feel there's enough potential risk factors here that this is part of my top three. And this child has not been fed for 24 hours. Now, I guess different to the first two scenarios in terms of a 4-year-old has got more potential to seek out food for himself. And I guess thinking about in different cultures and different parts of the world in terms of kind of what would be expected of 4-year-olds. I'm not necessarily saying kind of one approach is right or wrong, but kind of in some settings, more responsibility may be placed on 4-year-olds. I mean, there's another view that says kind of 4-year-old is still like Christina, very young children, and they should be treated as such. But we know that's not always the case, and sometimes very young children will be placed in a range of difficult situations and demanding situations where they have to take some degree of more responsibility for themselves. So this 4-year-old girl who has not been fed for 24 hours, it got 53% of your votes. There's others beyond that. I see you go on the page and you can see kind of more that are there. I guess what I would want to stress is that this is a kind of very academic exercise in terms of that you could argue to and fro about. I mean, obviously, all these scenarios have got kind of elements of risk and vulnerability in them, and we're using it as week one. It's more almost a kind of warm up exercise in terms of like how do we begin to think about risk and vulnerability. In any sort of professional going into a situation in terms of trying to assess it and trying to understand the degree of risk and vulnerability that has been presented to a child, would need far more information than we've presented in this scenario to you, and it would be almost impossible for a professional coming in well, it would be impossible for a professional coming in to make an in-depth assessment of what exactly is going on here and what are the risks and vulnerability, what is there a degree of risk or danger to the child, and do we need to think about stepping in or offering some sort of intervention in some way. So there's no right or wrong answers to the scenarios here in this sense. It's more about encouraging us to think about what are some of the risk factors that we feel either professionals, carers, family members need to be aware of when thinking about how we look after children and how we attempt to promote positive growth and development and good health, both physical and mental well-being, and how we also guard against any dangers and try to limit or prevent vulnerability. That's what that exercise is about. So go to the page if you haven't already. Can I see how people voted? See the comments that I've made, and can I see the comments that people have been posting in terms of explaining their selection of their three, their top three in that sense, and see how that compares to you. So to your choices. So thanks for engaging in that exercise. I'm going to move on now to Billy's story. Billy's story runs through the 6 weeks of the course. I'm just going to pause and take a drink of water here so my throat isn't too dry. Thank you. So Billy's story runs through the 6 weeks of the course, and the story develops. Now I'll try my best not to give anything away. Obviously, I know what comes beyond. So we're 2 weeks in, and you've been introduced to Billy and some of the things going on for Billy, and I guess also going on for Billy's mum, and linking back to one of the scenarios in that earlier exercise. What you get a clearer sense of this week in terms of some of the issues facing Billy's mum in terms of her mental health and issues of stress and depression, and then encouraging you to think about not just her needs, but about then how that in turn impacts on Billy and his growth, development, and well-being, and the caring circle that's provided for him. So we're 2 weeks in, and I know after those first 2 weeks, I guess after both weeks, after the second week, we can ask you in the second week, are you more or less concerned about Billy now that you've got a bit more information about Billy and what's going on? And from looking through the comments that were posted, there's some real common themes that are coming out. And actually, just before I go into those comments, it's also important to say, and then this is a bit about that. I started at the beginning by saying we've got 101 different countries represented. So we created Billy's story. Billy's story is fictional. Billy's not a real person, but Billy's story is very much based in reality, certainly based in reality in Scotland and the UK, in terms of many of the situations and challenges that many children and families up and down the country will face on a daily basis. So whilst it's not real, the themes and issues we're exploring absolutely are. But they're set within a Scottish, within a UK context. And I would be encouraging all our learners from our 101 countries to be thinking about these themes, these issues, how do they apply and how do they play out in your country and in your setting? Because I think a lot of what we're talking about here is universal in terms of how we best care for, support, bring up young people, and when vulnerabilities exist, and we've seen this in terms of Billy's vulnerabilities, in terms of his family situation and his social situation, about some of the risks and vulnerabilities that exist for him, about how we might respond to those, or how our systems sometimes do or don't respond to young people and families in these situations. So Billy's story, yeah, the story is contextualised to Scotland, but I've been encouraging people to think about like how's this play out in our setting and these universal themes. And there were some fairly constant things coming out of the comments that you were posting, and there was a general theme of, on the whole, people being more worried about Billy after the second week than they did after week one, and a big part of that being connected with learning more about his parents and learning more about the mum being this hugely important figure for Billy, and there have been hugely positive elements to that. But mum experienced her own kind of mental health issues, and that sometimes getting in the way of her being as available for Billy as she would like to be, as Billy would like to be, as I guess any parent would like to be, and then about the consequent impact on Billy in terms of his ability to make sense of that and feel safe and claimed and cared for, and also the worry that will cause him in terms of kind of seeing his mum experiencing her own mental health issues, in terms of that, both his understanding of that and being worried about her health kind of longer term. And then we were also introduced to Dana, and the information we've had to date in terms of Billy's day-to-day life is a more peripheral figure in a sense, and also getting a bit of information about the perhaps not the most consistent figure in his life, in terms of kind of sometimes when plans are made, not always being followed through. And again, encouraging people to think about like how will Billy potentially make sense of that and internalise that in terms of what's going on for him. And when we put these two things together, lots of comments saying I'm more worried about Billy. And I've pulled out a couple of comments that I think spoke to some of those themes and said I think some quite important things. So the first comment I picked out was from Sharon Mitchell. So Sharon, thanks for posting the comment that you did. And actually, what I really liked was the first thing you said. You said it was lovely to see what Mum and Billy have when she's feeling her best, and both really thrive from that. Because it would be easy to look at this scenario and totally focus on the worries, the problems, the vulnerabilities, and the fact that you started your post by stressing the positive aspects of that, because there absolutely are positive aspects of that. And it's I thought that was excellent. You might want to say, but due to this not being consistent and going from one extreme to another, does this make Billy vulnerable? His lack of understanding of his mum's condition, and I think that can be a real challenge for a lot of young people in situations such as Billy, about how they actually understand what might be going on for parents or other family members or such like, and how they're able to make sense of that. So it's kind of potential lack of understanding of mum's condition, could no one to give him reassurance at home, and what you identify as a lack of consistency with dad, and this kind of creates an issue. And I also want to stress the fact here, Sharon, I like the fact that when you've mentioned dad, you've did it in quite a factual and neutral way, and you've said again a lack of consistency. And I think that's a good way of describing what you saw. I guess sometimes I've been a bit worried and possibly actually a bit disappointed. Sometimes when we get to this point of the programme, and we see comments in relation, especially after week 2 of Billy's story, and we'll see comments posted that absolutely castigate dad, and on the very small amount of information that you've been presented in Billy's story, and talk about Billy's dad in very negative ways, and sometimes on potentially quite discriminatory and kind of potentially kind of harmful ways. And Billy's story is fictional, but you're getting about 4 minutes a week. It's not a war and peace in terms of a huge story, and everybody's got their own story, everybody's got their own issues, everybody's got their own kind of backstory in that sense. And we don't, in week 2 of Billy's story, we don't give you too much of that backstory of Billy's dad, but just kind of give you some kind of brief information. So Shannon, I like the fact that you stuck to what we know, and you just described it as this lack of consistency from dad, and that's pretty much as what I know. And you begin to reflect on how might that impact on Billy, without jumping into more judgmental or negative comments as we can sometimes see at this point. And actually, if we think about whatever country you're based in, and kind of sometimes some of the media, and actually some of this can come from politicians as well, about the way that lots of groups of people get spoken about and the language that's used, that can often be very label and stigmatising and discriminatory, and whatever else is going on for Billy, kind of people tearing into his dad in that way is not necessarily kind of going to be helpful in that sense. So I like seeing comments that are a bit more respectful and based in facts and realistic in that sense. You then go on to say that the final thing you say, I think it's something that comes through in a lot of comments. The lifeline is a school, and it's good that you describe it as he's clicked with his guidance teacher, who's Scottish Fraser, and talk about that being a support, and other people pick up on that. I pulled out a comment from Sarah Jones. Sarah, kind of thanks for your comment. She said it's good to see that he's got support at school. You then going to say it would be interesting to see whether the school are able to offer further support, and not just for Billy, for his mum too. And I want to pick up on that in terms of, I think already we begin to see kind of quite a lot of comments saying, actually, if we're going to support Billy here, probably the most effective way to support Billy is to support mum and to support the family structure, because if we went and work with Billy in isolation, then we're not changing any of the things that surround Billy, and potentially cause him stress, risk, vulnerability, etc. Now, whether a school is going to be in the position to do that, and I think especially in kind of current scenario, resources, etc., it's not to say that couldn't happen, but I would tend to think that might be more kind of unlikely in a sense. But this theme of actually the best way to support Billy is support mum and support the full family, and how might you do that? But I guess that kind of brings us to another issue, which is how high a priority is a case such as Billy going to be in the current scenario? And this is even not, when I say current scenario, I'm not necessarily even talking about COVID. But let's go back to kind of pre-February, March, and even before then, when we think about a number of countries, speaking from a UK context, about the continual budget cuts that social care, social work, education are often experiencing in real terms, kind of services being limited or closed, and about how agencies are able to work, and many agencies lamenting the fact that it's very difficult for us to have the resource to do anything that might be seen as preventative. And a lot of the time what we're doing is kind of crisis intervention now. It's almost like it's only when things go wrong and a crisis occurs that resources have been allocated to cases. And about the human cost of that, about actually you can only get support, you can only get a service. You've actually got to suffer, and something's got to go wrong, and we've got to go into kind of crisis in order that kind of things be allocated. And I think probably kind of one of the kind of sad factors just now is seeing all these comments about concern about Billy, and I would share absolutely those concerns about Billy, but I'm not actually convinced that Billy would be a high priority just now in terms of that resource allocation, and that might be a bit of a challenge. But thanks for engaging with Billy's story so far. Billy's story, I say, continues for the whole 6 weeks, and whilst it's based in Scotland, the themes and issues that we explore are all very much universal. So keep watching, keep listening, and we'll be discussing Billy's story. We'll do that again in week 4, and we'll do that again at the end of week 6. To move on now for the kind of final section of the live stream. couple of people posted questions in advance, and I'd like to make a point of responding to them. So, and now when we have these international audiences, that it sometimes can be a bit of a challenge for me in terms of pronouncing names that are kind of instantly recognisable to me. So I'll start with some apologies in case I make any mistakes here. So a question from Heidi B. So Heidi, if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, please apologise. Thanks for posting your question. And as I'm going to read out the two, because there's a common theme to these two questions, I'm going to deal with them together. So Heidi asks, you talk about parents would benefit from knowing some of this, and I guess what you're talking about is especially some of the material we thought about in week 2 about child development and containment and different kind of theories and different things that help us to understand kind of children's growth and development and understanding kind of what can help or hinder that. So if you'll benefit, parents would potentially benefit from knowing some of this, have a better understanding of the impact of those early attachments that children form. Could classes or info be offered in some way? So this notion of kind of what could be offered to parents to kind of help them do some of this. And then we had another kind of comment from Hiba Al Ghul. So Hiba, again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thanks for you posted kind of quite a long post with a bit of questions in it as well. But there was a common theme here when you said that kind of raising awareness of the kind of this common theme of kind of how do we help or support families to be in the best position to look after children that they can be. And you actually talked about, no, that's the question, why is it not mandatory before its formation for families or potential parents to educate themselves about stuff like this? And you say, don't you think that requiring those who are wishing to have children to attend classes to raise awareness of parenting, and this may reduce many of the problems? I read that and oh my goodness, there's a whole live stream in itself, kind of talking about kind of some of the kind of issues here. So let me kind of jump into the questions that are the points that you've raised here. So in a Scottish and in a UK context, there are many organisations that run such things as kind of parenting classes, kind of different support groups, different kind of agencies that do that, and we have a lot of both kind of pre and postnatal classes and services as well to help kind of expecting mothers and parents to be ready to enter the world of kind of parenthood and caring for children. But talking about that sort of stuff being mandatory, I think for many people would feel that quite a significant jump from where kind of many sides are now. But I don't know where you're based, but you actually say, for example, where I live, you don't actually say where that is. One of the conditions for completing marriage papers is that both parties are required to attend 4 classes explaining about the institution of marriage. Why not be so about raising children? And it's a very, I guess it's a very interesting, it's a very, very thought-provoking question. I guess what it does, linking this back to the fact that we've got 101 different countries represented here, and kind of many kind of cultural and social norms within that, but about the different cultural and social norms we do have with regards to different facets of life. You mentioned marriage here, but if we stick to kind of caring for children, different countries have, I would suggest, have very different cultural norms about the extent to which the state will be involved in the lives of children and impose different things on parents in terms of restrictions and such like. So if we just kind of cite a kind of some obvious examples that we know exist. So the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child has existed for many years now, and just about every country in the world is a signatory to that. But actually, one of the most significant, or probably the most significant, that isn't a signatory to that is the United States of America. And a lot of that's tied up in politics about the politics of America and about perhaps views about the United Nations. But I think it also reflects something, or certainly a lot of the literature and analysis suggests, it reflects something about a cultural norm, a very much a cultural norm within America about that notion of kind of parents. And it's my absolute right to bring up my child in the way I see fit, and 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 to sign up to something that begins to impose what people might view as rules or restrictions round about that, then begins to impact, kind of restrict the rights of the parent in that scenario. Now, also the UN Convention, other people would view it in kind of very different ways, but that's one example of, I guess, quite a significant cultural difference. Also, I mentioned, go back to the scenarios when I was talking about the 4-year-old, and I kind of hinted at the fact that in different parts of the world, in different cultures, for a whole range of different reasons, especially as young children grow up, the speed at which children are expected to take on responsibility, to be more independent than somebody, or perhaps to be a young carer for younger siblings, or kind of part of a group, will kind of that will vary very much, or does vary very much as well in different settings, different cultures, different countries as well. So we've differences in that way. And then another way, I guess, I would cite would be, certainly from a UK context, comparing us to some of our European counterparts, and thinking particularly about kind of some of the kind of, yes, kind of Scandinavian countries, and even countries such as kind of Germany and Holland and Belgium, where again a lot of the literature and a lot of the research would suggest it's far more, if I use the word normal, it's far more accepted for the state to have more routine involvement in via different institutions and functions in the lives of families and children, as opposed to a country such as the UK, where perhaps different to the US, in that we're not as kind of libertarian, if that's the right sense in that sense, but we're not as accepting as that state, that regular state intervention. And so coming back to this question about should stuff like this, should parents be required, or should parents or potential parents be required to know this, to learn this, and to evidence it? It's almost like, if you want the responsibility of having a child, then you've got to evidence it. In some ways, there's a logical bit to kind of the appealing nature of that, and that if everybody got that, would everybody have a better chance of caring for children in a way that was more beneficial and supportive? But in many ways, it's opening a bit of a Pandora's box in terms of kind of what we allow people to do or not, and where we kind of place different where we place different restrictions. And as I say, Hiba and Heidi, I mean, almost there's a whole, certainly there's a whole one of these sessions, there's a whole course on that in itself, in a sense, in terms of how we best prepare and support adults to be the best parents or carers that they can be. But as you're linking this back to Billy's story, for instance, and thinking of Billy's mum, or even thinking some of those 10 scenarios where sometimes, in many occasions, parents or carers, they'll know it and they'll absolutely have the best of intentions, but their own personal circumstances don't always allow them to be in the best position to care for children in the way that we might like them to be cared for. And I guess the challenge at that point then becomes, how are they best supported to do that, and when's the best place for us to potentially intervene to do that? But thanks for posing your questions. I feel I've probably answered by offering more questions back in a sense, but it's one of the really interesting and stimulating things about a course such as this, that there is so much to discuss and debate, and so many different ideas. And please, the page there where the comments have been been posted. If you've got things to say about any of this, then please kind of jump in and keep the conversation going. So we're getting to the time where we're going to kind of wrap up this session. The week's new material will open up on Monday, and I'll be doing the second live stream 2 weeks today as we come towards the end of week 4. So please keep engaging with the material, keep the conversations going via the comments and the posts, and it's great to see those conversations developing. And as I said at the beginning, that if you're looking for material that's more COVID-19 specific related, then please make a point of going to the Celsius webpage, the COVID-19 resource page, and there'll be interesting information for you there. So until then, look after yourself, stay safe, and hopefully I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. Okay, thank you.